Welcome back, aliens. My name is Navin Reddy, and today's interview will be exciting because from a long time we had so many questions on blockchain. So we are talking about blockchain, and then there are still some questions unanswered, right? Now, to answer those, we have someone from the blockchain industry itself. So I was able to get the hold on the president of NGD, who will be here to talk to answer those questions. So today we have John DeVadoss, who is the president of NGD, and he has huge amount of experience in the world of tech. Earlier, he was working for Microsoft, the architecture product team for .NET. He was working on Azure as well, and now he is with Neo, a blockchain platform, and they are doing amazing. So he's here to answer your questions. So let's welcome John DeVadoss. So thank you so much, John, for being with us here. So in fact, we have talked about your introduction, and then people are excited to listen to your views on Web3. And the most important part is most of them wanted to move from Web2 to Web3, but then they're still confused. What is Web3? And when you say we are moving away from Web2, so they're still confused in that stage. And then, so yeah, we'll put up those questions to you, but then we'll start with this term, which is Web3. And, when we talk about the blockchain in general, or when you talk about blockchain development in general, we don't always refer that with Web3 in the technical way. But the moment you talk about news channels, when you talk about all this big personality in the tech world, not exactly tech world, but finance world, they talk about Web3. It's still confusing. So what's your view on Web3 in general, John?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. I mean, very insightful. So I will be very candid with you and give you sort of my perspective, right? Personally, I think Web3 is a term that was invented by the venture capitalists because they like to put a tag on everything to drive their agenda. And that's kind of really my opinion, right? And the reason I say this is, look, Web2, as we know it, based on social media, and if you want to say it, surveillance capitalism, really is about using, the product, you and me, as the product, right? The users are the product. And so to assume or to imply that somehow we are building on this platform of surveillance capitalism, or even that we are evolving from this model of the person as the product, I think is fundamentally flawed. Because blockchains, decentralized platforms, right, stacks, are about completely the other end of the spectrum, right? For me, blockchain, stacks, platforms, decentralized platforms are primarily about the sovereignty of the individual, right? Completely different, right? At odds. And so that's why I, personally, I wish we wouldn't use this, but sometimes, the VCs are very powerful, and so we go with the terms.
That's right. In fact, when you talked about VC, if I want to start a new startup, and then if I want to visit a VC to pitch my idea, of course, irrespective if it is related to Web3 or not, the moment I want to talk about blockchain, maybe somewhere in my slides, I will put Web3 just to attract VCs, right? Maybe that's where this Web3 is getting famous. That's great. And then John, when I was talking about your intro to the audience, and then when we mentioned that you have worked with Microsoft and then .NET platform. So basically you have spent enough time in the world of pre-blockchain era, you can say, Web2 era, and then now you are focusing more on the blockchain part. So how was your journey from being into the platform of .NET and now the blockchain platform?
Yes, thank you. Yes, I spent, you're right, close to 2 decades with Microsoft. I built and led the .NET architecture, team and products, even before it was called .NET, and I worked on the incubation of Azure. Even before it was called Azure, built tools and frameworks for VS Code, and so on. And so, yes, you could say I worked on Web 1 and Web 2, if you want to say so. Yeah, so for me, the evolution comes from a different perspective, Naveen. The .NET platform, Windows Azure, was primarily based on a service-based architecture model, the so-called SOA, or perhaps microservices. Distributed systems. And so it was a very natural evolution from architecting, building, and making available distributed systems, platforms for millions, tens of millions of developers to, move into the blockchain space where fundamentally, again, decentralization is about distribution, right? It's about pushing to the limits. But I want to emphasize one thing. Sometimes we forget this. Blockchain platforms, blockchain stacks, yes, are about decentralization, but really, they're about the sovereignty of the individual. And that's what we need to remember, because if we forget, or worse, if we lose that, then there is nothing really magical anymore about this shift, this new platform.
Awesome, awesome. So basically, you're happy with the blockchain world, right? I mean, you're very excited about the technology as well. That's
absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I think so there's something I learned, in my career, Naveen, which is, when you look at so-called paradigm shifts, certain magical times in history, social drivers, economic drivers, and technology drivers come together, collide, right? Not always, but sometimes. And when they do, truly magic happens in terms of the socio-economic implications. And for me, my work in terms of Neo Legacy, Neo N3, the developer platform, and in particular, the developer experience, really is about empowering tens of millions of developers, right, to put control back in the hands of the sovereign individual, to build, institutions, not apps anymore, because we're not building apps. The so-called D apps really are de-institutions. And that's what motivates me. That's where I get energy and passion, right, to do what I do every day.
Yeah, and I can see that, having this chat with me morning 7 a.m., that's exciting. And now since you talked about Neo, so I just wanted to know more about Neo. And then what I learned about Neo from last few months is it's a great platform, first of all, apart from the other blockchains I've worked on, Neo looks very promising. And then there are certain things which are very highlighting when it comes to Neo 3. One of them is it supports multiple programming languages. And with that, I have a question for you, because I was a bit confused with this support of multiple languages for a blockchain technology, because the baseline working is a bit different compared to central systems, centralized applications. And when it comes to the other blockchain platform, they have their own languages, or maybe they are using some very new language to make a D app for that sake. When it comes to Neo, it supports multiple languages, right? So do you really think that the Web2 languages like Java, JavaScript, C++, C#, does it even make sense in the blockchain world? Or do we feel that we are missing some features? Of course, it will support basic features, but then when it comes to some amazing feature like, when you want to do transaction in crypto, or maybe you want to create a smart contract where you are converting a legal entity as well. How do you think all the languages will support the features of the app?
Thank you, Naveen. That's a wonderful question. In fact, that's something I have a lot of passion again for. So just in terms of history, right? I've spent over 20 years working on developer tools and developer platforms, and having shipped multiple versions of .NET and Azure. So I think, I know something about developers and building stacks for developers. And I'll tell you, there's a fundamental flaw that the early Ethereum and the Ethereum spin-offs, the clones of Ethereum, like the Solanas and the Avalanches did early on, was they came from a perspective of building a stack. They did not understand developers and developer platforms and productivity. And so they assumed incorrectly that they had to devise a new language like Solidity and so on, right, for this platform. Fundamental flaw. And here is why. Because developers are developers, meaning, they have expectations in terms of the experience, the tools, the productivity, right? It should be a fun, enjoyable and stimulating experience. Back at Microsoft, I used to have this kind of mental model. I would say there are two ways you can think of when you build for developers. One is you're hiking up a mountain. You're climbing, you have a map, you have a compass. It's a hard grind, it takes time, and eventually, you get there slowly, right? Or you can think of downhill skiing. When you're skiing downhill, there is no map, there is no compass, right? There is no grind, it's just fun, it's pleasure. And that's really the way developer tools and platforms have to be thought of, right? Which is why for Neo, a couple of years ago, when we set out to build the tooling, the frameworks, right? The toolkit, the blockchain developer toolkit, we said, look, polyglot meaning, any language, multiple language, because when you build a platform, you don't make developers come to you. This is a fundamental flaw, right? When you build a platform, you go to where the developers are. And the developers are doing Python and C# and JavaScript and Java and Go and Rust, right? And that's the fundamental idea, which eventually, the Ethereum guys and their clones, will eventually get to, which is the developer world is a polyglot world. Now, to your question, in terms of constraints or not really, because these are Turing complete platforms. However, with that said, in certain cases, you want to provide the rails or the railing to enable productivity, to enable developers to write certain kind of smart contracts for DeFi or for NFTs and so on. And that's again what I call syntactic sugar. Syntactic sugar is kind of the icing you provide for developers in their preferred language, right? To make it again, more fun, more enjoyable, just more pleasure, in terms of writing code, as opposed to making it a hard grind, in terms of I got to, write this code and push it and get it. That's fundamentally not the way. You might get 10,000 developers, maybe 50,000. But remember, across the world, there are about 22 million plus professional developers. And if we want to make a difference to all of those people across the world, we certainly have to go to where they are. And that's what we are doing with respect to N3.
Oh, that's true. And then there's one more thing which maybe it also adds a barrier for someone who wants to get into blockchain world. I've seen, when I was talking to one of my trainees, I was giving a session, and then suddenly the topic of blockchain came up. And then they had this question, okay, I want to start with blockchain, but then do we really have to learn a new language? Because for some people, yes, learning a language is a big thing. They are excited about the technology, but then having extra layer in between, like learning a language, will be a bit of a barrier for some people. But that's right, supporting
Absolutely.
multiple languages is a great thing.
Absolutely, it's friction, right? It's pure friction. And the one thing you cannot have, you should not have when you are targeting millions of developers is any kind of friction. So for example, I'll tell you, right, with the N3 developer toolkit, you can build, test, and deploy a smart contract in about 2-3 minutes, right? And then for me, the vision is this, right? When you go to, for example, a Microsoft Azure, you're building an Azure function, or for example, you go to an AWS, you're building a Lambda function. It has to be the very similar, developer experience, as effortless, as fluid, right? And again, like I said, as fun. I want to emphasize fun because development is fun, ought to be fun. And if it's not, there's something fundamentally wrong with the platform or the tools, right? So again, your point is absolutely spot on. Friction of any kind. And when you have new developers coming in, absolutely, give them templates, give them wizards, which we have built, right, to enable that sort of quick, drag and drop productivity. And eventually, as they mature, as they learn more, as they become more proficient, they'll want to explore all of the bells and whistles. But to start, it's got to be like downhill skiing. Make it as simple, make it easy, make it fun.
True. And then once we talked about the languages, it supports multiple languages. And then, so let's say if someone wants to start their career in the app development, doesn't matter, irrespective of the platform, once they know the language, once they know what the basics of blockchain is, and when they start developing, what are the best practices they should consider while deploying it to the production environment, or even to make a simple application? Because in the Web2 world, we have so many books, when you want to make an application, you know what to follow, right? You have so many books, you have so many people who are talking about the app development in the Web2. But when it comes to Web3, no one knows the best practices. They know how to make an application, but it's important for the customers as well. If you are launching your product to the client, your client should be happy with your app as well. So as a developer, what are the best practices you will convey to the audience that they should follow for the app?
Again, it's a really good question, man, really good question. And I'll tell you something, again, to just be a little bit perhaps contrarian, right? The fact that, as you said, we have so many books and materials in terms of how, to write code, I think fundamentally is a flaw, right? It's not that complicated. It cannot be, right? And if it is, because, then something's wrong somewhere, right? That's kind of how I see it. I told you about how you can use our toolkit in about 2-3 minutes, build, test, deploy a smart contract. That's how it's got to be, right? So back to your question, where do you start and how do you, like I said, write good code, good smart contracts, and obviously good, DApps? It's very simple, fundamentals. test first, right? As a developer, test first design, test driven design. And we've built, by the way, we shipped a few months ago a TDD framework for developers, using the blockchain toolkit on N3. That's a fundamental principle, which means that, before you write the code, write your tests. It's just good hygiene, good practice, good habit. And that way, when you modify the code, fix bugs or add new features, the test cases will tell you, what has changed, right? That's the one thing I would emphasize. The second thing is, as a developer, especially in the blockchain space, write composable code, composable open blocks, right? Where you can mix and match. And that's a fundamental principle, in this distributed, decentralized world of blockchain, which is anything you build will and ought to be used by other developers. And anything you build, you will be using, code and stacks and blocks built by other users. So be respectful, be open, and I would say perhaps be inclusive in how you think about the composability. Now, this means things like standards, open standards, schemas and such. And in fact, I serve on the governing board of the Global Blockchain Business Council. I was a co-founder of the Interwork Alliance 2 years ago, where we worked on the token taxonomy framework, for example, and other tools, including the visual token designer, to provide developers with these open standards, schemas, and protocols. Critical piece, because the world, is not an island. And again, no blockchain platform will be an island. And so we will have interoperability, which means, again, openness and composability. That's the second thing I would say. And the third thing, and perhaps the last thing in terms of a developer, writing good code is just keep it simple. It's always keep it simple, right? It's not that complicated. And why keep it simple? Because, next week, somebody else might be using your code, might be enhancing your code. Keep it simple, because the fact that it is composable means we have small building blocks. When you have small building blocks or smaller building blocks, then you have the advantage of making each of those building blocks somewhat simpler to understand and to use. That's kind of, back to basics, I would say, very simple.
Yeah, that's right. In fact, just to reiterate, I can remember 3 important points from this session, and very important, John. The first one is make sure that you build small modules so that others can also use it. And it is important for you, if you want to update your code should look simple. In fact, when I used to make applications, of course, you don't always build application from scratch. Sometimes you have to update the existing application. So you have to understand the other people's code. So if you are that first person who's writing the code, you have to make it simple for others to understand and update. Next, make sure that you test your application, because that's very important. I know in the Web2 world, some people, they just write the application and deploy. And then if something goes wrong, of course, we can change. Don't do that in Web3 because it's very critical. In blockchain world, make sure that you test each smart contract before deploying. And one thing you mentioned about the interoperability, right? Is it something related to cross chains, John?
Certainly, absolutely. You're right. And when you have multiple platform stacks, private, public, you have heterogeneity. And so, yes, it is about cross chains, it's about bridges, it's about oracles, and it's also about using off-chain resources like file systems, right? A simple example, right? And storage and so on. So any kind of, interaction, obviously implies interoperability, which, as you said, cross-chain is a critical scenario. And especially because we are talking economic platforms, right? Blockchains are economic platforms, which is why, as you said, when you have a test-first approach from a security, right? From a security of the smart contract and the apps themselves, and also from an economic perspective of what will it cost for your smart contracts to run and to operate. Once again, it's even more critical that you have a test-first mental model, as you said, an approach to building, and of course, deploying your smart contracts.
Right. With that, I remember something, so when I started my career in Java, I had this big question, which platform I should choose. In fact, it's very common for everyone who's starting their career, because they know something about everything, but nothing, they're not master of anything. So that they choose, should we go for Java platform or .NET platform?
Yes.
I went for Java for maybe one reason compared to maybe the other options I had, is because it is a good ecosystem which provides a lot of different features, right? Maybe you can build application for mobile or for web, whatever you want to. And I always believed in a good ecosystem, right? Because if you have a good ecosystem, irrespective of which technology you're working in future, it will be helpful. So how important is a blockchain ecosystem for a particular developer? Let's say if they choose a particular blockchain, maybe Neo or Ethereum. So how important is the ecosystem which they are working on? Or can they choose anything and then they can decide later, okay, so it's not suitable for me, let's jump around.
So that's a very good question. I'm glad you shared your personal experience because I can relate to what you said as a new developer, right? Many years ago. So what is your first language? What do you want to start with? And, like you said, should I pick a little bit of each or really focus on one and become a master of that, right? Just one point I want to add is, if there are new developers or people new to developing on blockchains, my personal opinion is to pick one, any one, and then just, really become proficient at that. Because when you're proficient in one language, as you know, Naveen, you can translate that to other languages, right? It's kind of the mental model of, okay, I can do this way in this language, and so how do I do it in this language, right? So that's just a personal opinion I want to express. What your question in terms of the ecosystem? I think of it broadly as a community. And I would say as a developer, look for a healthy community, a strong, vibrant community that is building, contributing, and enhancing, like we have with the N3 ecosystem as an example, right? I mean, the N3 ecosystem is a global community. There are developers working on it, across North America. We are based in Seattle. There are developers in Latin America, in Western Europe, Eastern Europe, Asia, China, South Asia, India, right? And so I would look for communities that are healthy, strong, vibrant, and then you have the ability, like you said earlier, Naveen, to share, to reuse, and to learn, right? Because you want to keep learning. There is never a true mastery, right? We're talking, obviously, you're from Bombay, I'm from Madras originally. In India we say, Vidwan, right? I mean, Vidwan is an aspiration, but Vidyarthi, I would say we're all Vidyarthis because we're all students, right? And so the health of the community is a critical factor in terms of, I would say, for developers. And so look at the N3 community and always look for others. I don't want to compare and sort of contrast, other. I think developers can make their own choices on that front, but I would say, healthy community to share, to reuse, to learn, right? And to give back, I believe is the paramount thing, which is what I enjoy about the developers that we work with on a global scale. And personally, I focus on the developer platform and the developer tools, and there are other folks building on, file systems and oracles and identity, and so on and so forth.
That's awesome. You mentioned about Vidyarthi, right? So yeah, so we are always a student, right? Irrespective of how much you know, there's something more to learn every day and every time. That's great.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, absolutely, right? That's the spirit we have to impose and sort of really, encourage people to adopt as they're building, I think, on these platforms. Thank you for saying it.
That's awesome, John. In fact, I got so many insights from you today. So I was having this question, something I was clear about, but I wanted to know your perspective on those things. And then now it makes much more sense, John. Now, in fact, I guess we have some launchpad coming up, the hackathon for neo blockchain developers. So can we just put more light on that? What exactly is the launchpad and hackathon and the timeline for that?
Yes, so in fact, so very good point. Thank you for asking. Earlier this week, a few days ago, in fact, we had a community call. I think Hong Fei was there. He's the founder of Neo, the original, the visionary, the man behind the stack, and we had other people, Stephen and others, to kick off the launchpad, the hackathon. Strongly encourage developers, existing as well as new developers, to look at and sort of play with the stack that we have. In fact, I would also strongly encourage people to look at the developer toolkit that we have built, and I assure you, you'll find it comparable, if not better, than toolkits from the big guys, the Amazons and the Microsofts. And I would appreciate any feedback. Please try the tools. Give me feedback. We want to make it even better. We want to make it fun, for new developers to try. And also, I want to say, in terms of the underlying architecture of N3 itself, both in terms of the technology architecture as well as the economic model, I think developers new and migrating from other stacks will find it quite a enjoyable experience, a productive experience, but also more importantly, to create business value, commercial value, right? For the builders themselves. And so strongly encourage people to give it a shot, try it out, and tell us what you like, tell us what you would like to add, to improve. Always, like you said, with DRPs, we want to make it even better. So give us the feedback, but most of all, give it a spin. I assure you, give the tools and the platform a spin, you will have a lot of fun. I can assure you.
Oh, that's awesome. So for everyone, we have Neo Polaris Launchpad Hackathon coming up. And then it's very exciting time, because this is a time where you have something new happening and you can be a part of it. So the entire ecosystem for the finance industry or for different industry is moving from the kind of Web2, we can say, to Web3, and we can be a contributor. And one way to start with that is to participate in the hackathons. So you will find a link in description to participate in the hackathon, and then you can get some more information on that. John, if you want to add something to the hackathons, and if you want to motivate people to join the hackathons coming up.
Absolutely. And again, thank you for sharing the link, Naveen, and thank you for sharing the information on the hackathon to the broader community. Once again, I want to say, to echo my earlier point, give it a spin. It'll be fun. I also want to challenge people, to push it to the limits. I think you will be pleasantly surprised at the scale and the scope of the architecture. Again, technical as well as economic. Give it a spin. Last year was quite a eventful year in terms of NFTs, and so the explosion we saw with respect to that sector. I believe DAOs will see an explosion in the coming months and years with respect to innovation, with respect to how to visualize, how to have the mental models, but also in terms of the governance architectures. So again, I want to challenge developers and give it a spin. We have multiple tracks. I think the folks have done a good job in terms of themes and having multiple tracks to encourage people to focus. But most of all, I would say, come in any hackathon, and especially for this one for us, come in with an open mind, right? Really, it's about having fun. It's about you as the developer trying something new, different, right? It's a low risk. It's a high return in terms of the effort, the time, and the energy you put in. So come in with no constraints. Try it out. And if you want something different, new in terms of the developer experience, tell me, ping me. I'm very happy to help you. I'm on Discord, of course, on Twitter as well. Not a big fan of Twitter, but certainly, we're on Discord and very happy to connect, to share, to learn. And I want to learn from you as well. Devs are trying it out, and I'm very happy if you have feedback for me in terms of what we could do to make your developer experience even more productive and more.
Oh, that's great. So everyone, this is an exciting time for you. So do participate in the hackathons and make sure that you watch John's other videos on YouTube, because from last week I'm doing that and I'm so motivated by watching his videos. So many things to learn from you, John, literally. Maybe I can make notes, the way you talk, the way you
Thank you, Naveen. You're very kind.
articulate.
Thank you.
So thank you so much, John, for the interviews, and yeah, see you next time. Thank you so much.
A privilege. You take care.